knowledge. And so we've been adding a lot of things to the set of placement vehicles that we use. So let's start with tests. And there's a lot of good things about tests. They get kind of beaten up unfairly. They're cheap, they're quick, and we needed that in our community colleges. They appeared to be fair because they're standardized. They do measure some important subjects like reading, English, and math. They're predictably valid. You had a study done on your own instrument by College Board. Their psychometricians found that it was valid, and I'm sure you're using that information. And the tests are usually created by experts. And I point that out because in North Carolina, our most recent test was not created by experts. Well, experts, yes, expert instructors. But expert instructors, as it turns out, are not expert psychometricians. They're not experts at creating standardized tests. So I would ask this poll question, but I'm not sure how to do it exactly. What percentage of our students in my college using the newest placement test that was created by instructors across the state place at college level in English and math? Now just think about that. What percentage do you think place at college level in English and math? The answer is, just like unfortunately with coronavirus, we're number 1%. 1%. So 1% of our students were placing at college level. They just lowered the cut score from 75 to 70. So my estimate is about 5% will now place at college level. So that's really important, is that standardized tests are created by expert test creators, not expert instructors necessarily. So just to look, you can see these tests are valid. This is either North Carolina or South Carolina, Compass test predicting college composition, first semester. You can see it is a slope, a positive slope there. Can't tell which state this is though. One's North Carolina, one's South Carolina. Kind of looks the same, doesn't it? But then I looked at Texas, kind of looks the same, doesn't it? These tests all do about the same thing, the ones that were created by the test companies. So that's kind of interesting. They are positively related to grades, and they do predict grades in terms of being predictably valid. But what's wrong with tests, and why have we moved away from them, or are moving away from them in your case and many other cases? I always love this cartoon. It's a perfect example of one thing that's wrong with standardized tests. Students are not standard. So the test might be standard, but that doesn't matter. You cannot standardize education because students are not standard. The relationship between the material, between the instructor and the student is never standard. It changes with every student. It changes over time as students develop. So, that's important. Tests miss other important subjects. They don't measure science, or, you can name a lot of subjects. There are snapshots of content knowledge, and the test is not really the same environment as a class or a job, and they're relatively weak predictors. So that's some things that are wrong with tests. But I don't think tests really are the problem. They do what the test publishers promised for them to do. They do predict test scores. They don't really predict grades as well. And yet, traditionally, we've used tests to predict grades. That's been part of our problem. So tests are weak predictors of grades. They're actually very strong predictors of other tests, right? Of students scoring on other tests. So just to give you some example from John Hetz out in California, he's kind of the guru of placement out there. When he was doing this research at Long Beach City College, the chart on the left is predicting the placement test score in English. The chart on the right is the measures that predict the student's actual grade. So you can see on the left, what predicts the placement test score really well is the CST in English Language Arts. That's the California High School test, whatever they call it. That does a really good job, GPA not so much. But predicting college grades, that high school test doesn't do much. but the GPA, the overall high school GPA, does a lot. It's the same in math. The tests predict tests, the grades predict grades. Now, I can't see if there's any questions, but I imagine you might have some. And Christy, if you want to just jump in if there are questions and ask those.
Sure, not yet, but
no
yeah,
problem.
keep them coming, everybody. So go ahead and put them.
All right, so here's an example of a real student that I had, I don't know, a year ago, something like that. Student was older, had to take the placement test, had test anxiety, as many students do. I've had a student almost faint in my office just thinking about the placement test. Placed at the bottom in math, one level below for reading and English, what we called DRE 098. In the DRE 098, that's Developmental Reading and English, she had a 100 on the classwork and 85 on the final exam, but mastery level is 80%. So she's fine so far, but then on the in-class essay, to cap off the class, she got a 79, so she failed. She had to retake it. She was an abuse victim with a dangerous ex, living 7 hours away, homeless, living in a storage unit for real. She got out of that. And then she didn't show up to class and was gone for a few months. We could never get her any financial aid or financial help because her financial aid progress and grades were bad, partly because of this class. So she volunteered and helped other students. The high school GPA, in comparison, is free, potentially immediate. And that's even better for us. Measures many subjects. Measures a broad set of skills. You can imagine a high school student, does a whole lot of things, not just takes tests. They write things, they do projects, they behave, come to class, etc. It's a relatively stronger predictor. It respects prior learning. We don't throw out all the great work that high school instructors do and say they don't know what they're doing these days. We try not to do that. And remember, those grades are given by experts. Not expert test creators, but expert graders, right? Expert teachers. So we have, this is about a particular student, but this is about all of our students. Students graduate from high school. They've just spent 12 years writing papers. But if they don't make the cut that we give them, the cut score or GPA, they're told they can't start learning to write papers in college or do math, etc. Something wrong there, it seems like. So multiple measures, definitely, but not the ultimate answer, I would say. And we'll get to that. Because I think what we do when we set these cut scores a lot of times is we're generating incapacity. We're saying the students can't, it's the opposite of the growth mindset, basically. Only it's on our side, right? We're saying these students can't do such and such. A lot of times that's an assumption and it's not correct. College readiness, if we measure it with a test, we're only measuring certain things, but even the GPA, I mean, it goes broader, but there's a lot of aspects to college readiness, and we need to be thinking about all of them. So this is the GPA and how it predicts grades. It's a little bit steeper curve, right? A little steeper curve than the test scores. And that's what you're going to see. You're going to see that tests will predict anywhere between 0 and 10% of first semester college grades in English and math and other courses. But high school GPA predicts anywhere from 9 to 17%, usually about 15%. So this is GPA predicting grades at the 2 largest community colleges in the state, accounting for about 21% of the system. This is at my own college, just saying, GPA, and there are GPAs that are point something, yes, all the way to 4.0, unweighted, right? There are higher GPAs. And this is, again, that same kind of curve. So you can see there's a stronger relationship between this than there would be between test scores. All right, so the presidents of our system voted 29-12 in 2013 to adopt high school GPA 2.6 or higher, and the student had to have a college prep 4th math class. Now we've gotten rid of that under our new system, but that's what we use to measure high school rigor. They also said, you know, you can use these certain standardized ACT and SAT scores. We had College Board create a customized placement test. We modularized our math. We combined reading and English. We shortened the remedial sequence. And there were good effects. Now this is, you look at the very right, GPA predicting college English. On the left, various parts of the placement test, the right placer part, the reading part, et cetera, et cetera. You can see the test scores, 0 to 10%. The GPA, 9 to 15% in this case. You know, that's pretty typical. And I looked at your own validation study for your own Texas test, whatever it's called, TSIA or something. Anyway, it's the same. It was 0 to 10% predicting math and English grades. These are, again, our modules from the test in math, predicting, as you can see, anywhere from 3 to 9% of the different, you know, grades in college math. So, you know, it's pretty typical across the country. It's not going to vary much. Well, people often say, why are you using the overall GPA? Why don't you use the math GPA to predict math courses and the English GPA to predict English courses? And this is why. And the Community College Research Center showed us this in their very first study that they did, 20,094 students in North Carolina, that basically the subject GPA or grades wasn't as predictive. And you can see that. The bold is the GPA predicting English or math. And you can see math tests do predict math grades a little bit better than English. You know, grades predict, I should say, grades predict grades. The math grades in high school predict 0.12, right? They correlate. It's 0.05 for English, which is basically almost nothing. So that's why we don't use the individual subject grades. It's not to say we should throw them out and never look at them. A student may be a whiz in math, and we might want to take that into account, but they might not be an overall good student, and we also probably need to take that into account. So, you know, what were the results of our multiple measures work? More students are, you can see in the orange, taking high demand courses. Access, we're increasing access. We're avoiding developmental ed. We're giving more students access to college level courses. They're taking more of these courses. More are placed at college level. These are 3 community colleges in North Carolina. You can see it's similar. We're increasing the number, and it's even way higher now under our new system. It's like 90%. Anyway, you know, placing more students at college level. That's great. Percentage of students in the prerequisite, the very bottom level, low, down. It's down to 9, 6%, something like that. Very low now. So that's good. So here's a poll question, and hopefully I'll be able to see the answers. Should placement data expire? I'm sure you've thought about that question. So yes, no, or I don't know. And by the way, on this particular question, we got a big boost from the horrible pandemic. It changed the way we look at expiration dates for this data. So Christy, how long are we giving people, and have they started to answer?
We do have quite a few responses, so if you take just 5 more seconds, if you haven't replied yet, please do respond to the poll, and then I will share the answer.
Because I'm sure at your colleges you're wrestling with this and, you know, a lot of other questions. Okay, so.
All right, so we see that the yeses, 56% said that placement data should expire, 13% say no, and 31% are unsure.
Great. So, let's see. I'm going to go on to the next slide. Oh, there we are. Okay. So why would we consider whether or not we should have the placement information expire? Well, one reason is because if you move from 5 years to 10 years, and we originally chose 5 years in our multiple measures policy because some people wanted basically 1 year and other people like me didn't want any expiration date. And so we compromised on 5 years. Under RISE, which I'll talk about in a minute, it's our new system, we moved to 10 years. And, you know, that saved or would save, I calculated just in my own college, almost $200,000. Now, this is the students' money. It doesn't always get people excited at the college, but it's exciting to the student. Or $3 million across all 58 community colleges, right, in one semester, in one fall term. If we unlimited it, it would be, you know, $4.25 million across the system of student money, right? This is student money, so it's important to them, even if we don't always consider it. And it would boost, not reduce completion rates. It would boost completion rates because of the same reasons that multiple measures and co-requisite education always are going to be boosting completion rates, meaning who actually gets to and through the college courses, because it's giving access and it's not harming success rates. And I have a lot of data I could show you, but I didn't put it in here. So coronavirus meant that people said, the system office said, you don't need to have any expiration date at all. We're going from 10 years to nothing for now, temporarily. I had sent them some data to show that really didn't hurt students. This was from the first time I did this study. I did it again, it came out the same. I know it's kind of hard to read this chart. Basically, if you look at the far left, these are students with a 2.6 GPA, and they've been out of high school for more than 16 or more years, right? Okay. If they don't meet the 2.6 high school GPA threshold that we set at our system, and now at our college we've kept it, and they've been out of high school 16 plus years, 80.3% success rate. That is higher than a student who just graduated from high school and met the threshold, right? A student who's been out of high school for 16 plus years, didn't meet that threshold, has a higher success rate than a student who just graduated with a 2.6 or higher high school GPA. There really shouldn't be an expiration date, and the reason for that is even though that test scores aren't very predictive after about a year or two, they really fall off quickly. GPA doesn't fall off nearly as quickly. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because even though the predictive validity diminishes for test scores really fast, very slowly for GPA, it doesn't matter because students who have been out a long time are more mature and they're going to be more successful. It's just a fact. And so, you know, what we really ought to say is, how long have you been out? A long time? Great. We'll put you in college level classes. I mean, if you really want to think about it that way, that's one thing we could do. The data show that quite clearly, that the longer you've been out, the more mature you are, the better your grades are going to be in college level classes. All right. What about college GPA? So on the left, you have things like high school GPA for students who have brought in college credits. I've done a study with way bigger numbers. These are small numbers of students, 39 here, 10 there, whatever. Doesn't matter, always comes out the same. If a student has done college since high school, we should be looking at their college data because that's more predictive. Again, the predictive value falls away over time, but if they do well, or if they've been out a long time, they're going to do well in college. And that's what's important. We're not always looking at the right things. The whole thing about predictive validity is really not as important as figuring out who's going to succeed in the classes regardless of one particular measure. All right. Another question you might ask are all high school GPAs equally valid? I often hear people say, well, what about down at that high school? Their grades, they're inflated. So we're going to do another little poll. Are all high school GPAs equally valid and predictive? There's a lot of these questions that, I'm sure you're wrestling with. But these are questions that we heard in North Carolina from our instructors, first thing, and our administrators as well, is they know that, in their district, there's 2 high schools and one of them is different than the other, or, in the neighboring county, they don't do things the same way, that kind of thing.
All right, about 5 more seconds, and I'm going to close the poll. All right, on that one, we have 18% who say yes, all high schools GPAs are equally valid, 65% say no, and 18% are not sure.
Which is typical. I mean, I think that's typical of, our opinions in North Carolina when we, started asking these questions. That was a big concern. And so we looked at it. We used that same data set from the Community College Research Center, the 20,094 students who went directly from high school to college. And we said, let's look at their grades in high school and in college by college. This is all 58 community colleges in North Carolina. And other than Pamlico, which only had 24 students represented, you can see it's pretty darn parallel. So if the high school grades in green, right, were inflated, and some of them are higher than others, you can see that. Generally, the college grades at the colleges those high schools fed into were also a little bit higher than others. It's kind of parallel. So if we were to blame the high schools for grade inflation, we might also want to look at our own colleges who, grade in parallel, roughly in parallel. There's other data that the Community College Research Center showed. So the answer to the question is actually no, they're not equal, but most of them are right in line, not far from the others, right? There are a few extreme cases. Most of those are charter schools at the positive or negative end of predictive validity for their GPA, but most of the school districts, if you're a good student in high school, you're a good student in college. And it's because it's not really about just the rigor, it's about the habits of the student. And if they have good habits, they're going to carry those over. So what I did was I said, let's test this another way. Let's look at the 7 colleges who have the highest average high school GPA, which is a 2.7 or higher, and see what their college math grades were. Really not that different. Some were lower, some were higher, but they're kind of right in line. And I looked for English and all. So it really doesn't matter what district. It also doesn't matter what diploma type, other than what we call compensatory ed students who have profound intellectual disabilities. Other than those students, really doesn't matter. The GPA is very predictive. International GPAs are also predictive if you can get them. All right, so predictive validity seemed to work, right, until the accountability movement said students really aren't getting through. And that's why we came up with some changes to DevEd, including Corequisites. What's good about Corequisites? Well, they, again, further the avoidance of DevEd, right? No more prerequisite developmental ed. And if you get to 100% Corequisite, you have no prerequisite developmental education. So it's helping to avoid something that we kind of figure, and a lot of studies have shown, isn't all that helpful. It's meant to be helpful, but it isn't all that helpful to the student and their outcomes. The Corequisites give direct access to the gatekeeper courses, and they're not meant to be reductive or remedial, right? They're meant to simply support the student in their college level course, which is, of course, what we all want. So they make sense theoretically. So this is what RISE looks like in North Carolina, and it's a very simplified version because there's a lot more to the placement, as you'll see in a minute. But if we just take a new student, graduated high school, look at their high school GPA, we say 2.8 plus. Now at my college, we're still using 2.6. We got a waiver. but this is 2.8 plus, your college level, no gateway. No co-requisite. You can take the gateway course. 2.2 to 2.8, you have to take the co-requisite, and below 2.2, you are in a transition course, which is prerequisite. What are the goals? Of course, equity, right? We want to, diminish those gaps. We want to get more students through the gateway courses. We want to have students wasting fewer resources. We really do care about that, especially at the system level, I think. And, the credit attainment, gateway completion, graduation, all that kind of stuff should go up. And it is going up. What does the placement look like? We've added a lot of measures. And this, as a person who helps students every day, actually all day long, enroll at the college, I love this. If they have an associate degree or higher, I can put in their placement at college level, generates all the non-course credits, they're good to go. I can look, of course, based on the courses they've taken in English and math and some other things. If they've been given an override in the past, I look at the message to see they got an override because they already took calculus, at another university. Then the high school GPA, right? It's kind of a hierarchy. And instead of a formula where we combine all this stuff like they do in California and New York, I'm going to recommend a simpler approach, which is this kind of hierarchy. Sharon Morrissey, who's now in the Virginia Community College system, said, let's not do a formula. It's too complicated. Let's just do a hierarchy. So multiple measures in one sense, not in the other sense, although GPA kind of is a multiple measure. But this is a simpler approach. If they meet this, great. If they don't, we look at the next one. We go down the list. What about ACT? What about SAT? What about if they're dual enrolled PSAT and pre-ACT and all that stuff? GED, now we have a score for that. Have a score for HiSET. Don't have one for TASC. I don't know why. Career and college ready, that's remediation in the high schools. Haven't seen much to come of that, but it was mandated by law in a budget bill. Transition courses or older developmental courses the student took, then they can move ahead. Developmental non-course credits. Sometimes we don't even know why they have them, but the computer says you can move ahead, you can move ahead. RISE placement test, the older placement test, AccuPlacer, NCDAP, all that. It gives you a lot of options. So very few students have to actually end up taking the new 1% solution, which is the RISE placement test. I like that because it helps way more students and gives way more access. So is this like the model? This is it? There's still some, at least in North Carolina, prerequisite remediation. It's maybe a low percentage, but it's still there. And also, that is still a high stakes thing because if a student is in the prerequisite, they don't pass it, they're not going anywhere. Very low percentage of those students will ever pass a college gateway course, just like under the old system. Also, the co-requisites are expensive and time consuming, and it looks to me now, we're just our first full rollout semester at my college, and they're kind of avoiding them. And I want to show you that in a figure. I wish I could have put it in this whole chart. Math avoidance was going down under multiple measures and all the other great things we did, modularizing our math, etc. Math avoidance was 60% in 2011. It went all the way down to 42% in 2014. Now it was climbing back up slightly. But as you can see from this table, and I apologize, it's hard to read, go to the top set, look at all math, read across, you see the 1,524 out of 4,913 students. These are new students this fall at our college. 31% are taking a math course. 36% are taking an English course. So here you see almost 58% were taking math in 2014, right? The flip side of that avoidance. Now, 31%. So 69% are avoiding math. So we're even higher than we were when we started. So that's a lesson for us. I'm sure you all have been doing this longer and have learned some of these lessons and rescued some of this stuff. But this is important because if they're not in their math and English, they're obviously not going to get through those classes because some of them will not be retained. So one of the questions that I always ask is when we should really intervene with students, when we should give them a required prerequisite. And I go back to the MALDEF settlement in California, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, I think it's called. And this is now reflected in California legislation. You also have really good legislation about this co-requisite model in Texas. It's very practical and specific, but in California, they were a little more theoretical. This is the philosophy of the developmental education and prerequisites. They said should only institute them when without the prerequisite, the student is highly unlikely to pass. Highly unlikely. Now what that means, who knows, percentage-wise, but highly unlikely. That's the only time you should make them do a prerequisite. Otherwise, it's holding people back, and in California, it was discriminatory to their ESL students. And this next quote is about ESL students, but it's really about all of our students. This is what we should be doing, according to the experts. We should be targeting the specific students with demonstrable academic struggles rather than giving a blanket treatment to all incoming students. We don't do that, we should do that, right? We should target the students who need the help, not with weak measures like 15% high school GPA, 0 to 10% predictive placement tests. Nothing wrong with those measures, they're really good and helpful, but there's 85% of a student's success we're not accounting for, yet we give a blanket treatment. We should be targeting the specific students. So, I always ask, is this co-requisite thing a fad? No, it's a step on the way to getting where we need to go. How does it fit, though, with guided pathways, which is also not a fad? It's structuring our education more for the student. But that's an important question. And you'll see some data in a moment that shows, well, actually, the data before is this data that shows we're not structuring the student's pathway. They are not taking those courses at my college. Maybe other colleges in the system are structuring the pathway better and making their students take their gateway courses in the first term, right? This is important. It should fit in with a structured curriculum. And that's not a fad. Is the system simple, right? Does it assign a placement? I'll show you what I mean with that in a second. Can you describe what we're doing for the student in a single sentence? I don't know if you can with ours. I don't think you can. Are the cut scores reasonable, right? So this is what the screen, we wanted a placement screen forever. We got this screen. Nobody's using it because it's not accurate. It's a mess. I mean, we use it for some purposes, mainly just to generate non-course credits, mainly. But anyway, it didn't come out the way we wanted it. We're a colleague system, and that's probably part of why, non-Unidata. But anyway, so here's maybe what it should look like. It should just tell the student, look, you can take English 111 without a co-requisite, or Math 110, you can take that, or, if you're going to take statistics, Math 152, you can register, but you have to take the 052. That's what it should look like. So it should assign a placement. The course pass rates, the cut score, you should look at that very carefully because, we have this 2.2 and 2.8. I don't know if those are the best levels. I mean, I really don't. At our college, we've got 2.6. You can see pass rate is 77% for students who meet our threshold rather than the state's new 2.8 threshold. Our threshold, 2.6 to 4, 77% of students are passing their courses. That's pretty darn good. But the students below 1.5 are really not doing well. So what is highly unlikely to succeed? You have to think about that and make a decision, and it's not a scientific decision. It's a political and a people decision. And this is retention. You can see the retention for those students below 1.5 high school GPA are very different from students who have a little bit higher high school GPA, but still are below that 2.2 threshold to get into co-requisite in North Carolina. All right, so what is the ideal model? I would say the ideal model is to give every student access to college level courses and support them as needed. That's not what we're doing now. We're creating blanket treatments for students on the basis of a 15% at best prediction of whether they're going to succeed or not. So 85% of it's kind of want to say a crapshoot, but it's definitely not, you know, certain, right? Whereas if a student starts missing class, if their attendance is bad, if they're starting to fail assignments or not turn them in or that kind of thing in real time within a couple weeks, you could go and rescue that student. So maybe what we need is a kind of an academic ambulance model. But you still might need to prearrange support for some students. We have students with many, many different kinds of conditions, disabilities, risk factors of all kinds, not just academic. So here's a student, a student in my wife's class at one point, and she wrote this. This was a response to a prompt of some kind in the class. I do like the painting because I am so enjoy with imagine. I don't like the art with essay because I don't interesting and not my thing too. What is that telling us? I mean, imagine if this were on Right Placer, what would that tell us? Turns out the student was a very good student. She did well in the class, but English is not her first language. She's not really an ESL student either. She was born in the United States. Her first language is sign language. She's profoundly deaf. So when we use single measures and when we make assumptions, we're often steering students wrong. But we do know there are populations that may need help. We may need to prearrange that help, right? Prearranging support. We may even need some kind of prerequisite support for certain populations. I would say no, but you know, that's something to consider. What is the ideal curriculum? And does it reflect how students actually learn? So Aristotle said that everyone loves to learn. You may think that's crazy, but your students text because they want to learn what somebody's going to text back to them, right? I mean, everybody does love to learn. It's just in the classroom or not. So I could kind of go on a little bit about this. I'm not an expert on the science of learning, except to say that to me, a lot of times we pack our curricula really fat, full of stuff. I remember I asked somebody in our reading curriculum years and years ago, what book are you all reading? And they said, oh, I wish we could read a book. Can't read a book because we have too much material to cover. Just isn't time, right? So if you think about how people learn, they learn by seeking, they're intellectually curious, they want to know stuff, they want to go somewhere, they want to do something. And if we're just making them passive accumulators of facts, that's not going to work. And so the curriculum being fat and having a lot of information in it sometimes gets in the way of the learning and the support, especially in a co-requisite setting, because all you're really trying to do is to support a college level course and help the student to learn in that course. And you can be diverted oftentimes by packing the co-requisite with its own curriculum instead of just having it be essentially guided practice. I had a whole bit to do, but I don't think we have time. All right, so this is from our instructors. You're way ahead of us, so you probably already know this stuff. Self-pacing may not lend itself to completion, may not be good with online learning. Don't make the prerequisite harder, right? We have a prerequisite with 4 essays, and if they want to pass into college level with no co-requisite, they actually have to pass 8 essays in order to get to college. If they can do that, why not just put them in college composition? Do the students have good computer skills? Do we track the non-completers' progress term to term? If they are fortunate and do re-up with us, are we tracking them and having them pick up where they left off? Work together to create the curriculum in an open collaborative committee. I'm sure you're all doing that. Build the co-requisite curriculum around the gateway course, obviously. Peter Adams, who's the English co-requisite guru, says do a one-to-one model, not the tripod. What are we doing at my college? The tripod, 2 curriculum courses being fed by 1 co-requisite. And training, of course, is the key. You can't do too much of that. So I'm not going to go over the whole curriculum. You can look at our catalog at any of our colleges and see that. But this is the course description, and it's a good course description. And then you see this is part of the syllabus or part of the curriculum. And these are all good things. And then there's part 2 and part 3 and part 4. Everything in here is great. And this could be helpful to the instructor, or what it could end up being is its own curriculum. And so if you are just using these things in the background to make sure these are the skills the student is learning while they work on their college level course, these are all great. Every one of these things is good, well thought out, well crafted. But if it becomes its own curriculum, that could be a problem. All right, so here are my recommendations. I would say beware of standardization because it's impossible. Treat students as individuals. We're not there yet. We need to get there. When using tests, require them to prepare because they do better and the tests are more accurate if the student prepares. Treat students as a group only when students in that group are highly unlikely to succeed. Develop the students, remediate just in time based on actual failing behaviors, rescue them, right? That's where we need to get to. It's a lot more efficient to do that. We're just not set up to do that. Validate placement methods by consequences. Look at how many students are getting through, graduating, accumulating credits, all that kind of stuff, not just course success rates. Make sure it's moving the needle. We don't know if our recent efforts have moved our needle or if it's the fact that our populations are getting younger. That could also be moving the needle. We don't know. Simplify and support rather than adding curriculum. Use multiple measures or just place them all at college level because that increases access, increases, credit attainment, all those things, and teach all the students. And I would say if our courses don't have at least an 80% success rate, then we're not mastering our job. And I say that because there are wide disparities between course success rates by faculty member within the same course that persist year after year after year. And those mean something. They don't always mean the same thing. Someone might be giving a whole bunch of positive grades without actually teaching the students anything. You never know exactly what they mean till you investigate, but you should set a benchmark, and that's my benchmark because I was able to go from the 40% success that I started with to closer to 88% by making a lot of mistakes. So, that's the question to ask. Is this moving the needle? So many things don't move the needle. So many of these high impact strategies, a recent study was done at universities on the Association of American Colleges and Universities, 10, these are famous, 10 high impact strategies. They showed no correlation between any of these practices being used at those universities and those universities' graduation rates, none. And yet we know we can move the needle, right? We don't just throw up our hands. How you do things and how it's implemented, all that is much more important than the idea itself. At your college, you're going to do something successful that some other college is not going to be successful with. So always not just, do the thing and look at the consequences, but consider the variables, that assumptions that govern what you're doing. Because I think there are a lot of mythologies in what we're doing still. The last thing I would say, prepare for the changes. When we first went to multiple measures, we shifted 739 students in one fall term. That's 13%, doesn't sound big, but it saved more than $500,000 for the students, and it left us scrambling to have enough college level courses. So basically prepare, and that's it. So any questions?
I've got one question. So you referenced the tripod model with Corequisite. Can you explain that one a little bit more?
Yeah, so, and Peter Adams is the person to ask about this, why it across the country, when people do that, it yields lower success rates, but that's what he says when he's looked at it across the country, it does that. What it is you're taking two college level courses and the students are being supported by a single co-requisite course. So in our case, we have a college level course of 25, 30 students, whatever. And then 10 of those students are in the Coreq, but they're in the same Coreq as 10 of the students from this other course, right? So that's the tripod, is you have two college level, one co-requisite being shared. And so hopefully the instructor is the same, but you know, at a small college, that may not be possible, or at a big college, or with turnover or last minute. I mean, we're still staffing some of our classes. That's a mess. It should be one-to-one, because again, the whole idea is to support this college level course with this co-requisite, and not, you know, several, or anyway. So that's that.
Got it. It looks like Bridget has her hand up, so I'm going to let her talk, see if she has a question. Hi, Bridget. Let's see, I'm trying to unmute you here. It doesn't look like it is working very well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I just wanted to make a comment and say, you know, he has given us a lot to think about, and I just really enjoyed this session, because there are so many things that need to be changed, and sometimes we just don't know where to start and where to begin. But this session, it just gives me a lot to think about going into this fall semester. So that's all I wanted to say.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think that's the thing. We're all learning. I mean,
Yes,
all the
sir.
time. Other
Okay, if
questions?
you have questions here in the remaining few minutes, then please do go ahead, either raise your hand or type them in the chat, and we'll be glad to address those. Otherwise, we will post the slides and recording later today on the Texas Success Center events page, and then they will be up on the Texas Corequisite project page a little bit later. So no more questions. I want to thank all of you for attending today. I want to thank our presenter, Dr. Brad Bostian, again for being here with us and sharing this important and thought-provoking information. So have a great day, everybody.
And feel free to email me. Take care.